I thought we had a really good discussion. And now we're ready to get started with our second panel, Catalyzing Climate Solutions Through Early Commitments. To lead the discussion, I am pleased to introduce Bill Abel, VP in charge of the North America Energy Practice for Aecom.
Hey, everybody. Again, my name's Bill. I work for Aecom. We're a global engineering and construction company, and I lead the company's energy business in the United States. That's our company's biggest energy business and part of Aecom's global commitment to industry ESG leadership. What we do in energy, both here and across the world, is to help accelerate the digitization, decarbonization, and resilience of the energy system, our economy, and the customers and the communities that we serve. Before we get into this panel, I want to kind of hit on a few themes and kind of key quotes that came up in the last panel, and that also came up in our discussion. And in some ways, the two are supposed to connect to each other, right? And here were some of the things. One of the first quote that stuck out in my mind when I sat down was, "We have a big footprint and need a big transformation," right? That was the direct quote. That was the first thing I heard when I walked in the door. That was followed by a whole series of discussions, which ironically had nothing to do with mandates. They were all about market creation, right? And they really focused on themes of transparency, certainty, and scale. Not technology, not whether the money and the leadership is there, but how do you scale the market? And our panelists are going to talk about that in detail. But I thought there were, again, a few kind of really interesting quotes that I just want you to keep in mind and we're going to come back to time and time. Again, one was, "All roads lead to transparency," right? I thought that was pretty interesting. We need a marketplace with integrity, right? We got a roadmap. We need clarity in the rules, right? So that we can create and transact value. And I thought one of the more interesting ones, avoid the kind of looking back where we say, how the hell did we let this happen? Another kind of key one that I think is reflected in both what we need to do today and the magnitude of the challenge going forward was progress over perfection, right? And then finally, investment and scale for the big stuff, and that investment and scale wasn't just about new shiny baubles, the most thing of interest, but it was a significant retrofit responsibility and obligation. In all of the work that we do in the United States and around the world, those are themes that we face every day, that you face in your work, and I'm excited to let the panel have at it. We've got a great panel today, and they're going to go in the order that they're seated in, both as individuals, as professionals, and through their firms. They've got a wealth of experience professionally and a track record of innovation and leadership in the industries that they come from. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. The way the format's going to go, we'll go in order. We'll take about 5 minutes for them to introduce themselves and their firms and to set the context of the discussion. At the end, I'm going to have some focused questions, an opener for everybody that's kind of a lightning round, then some specific questions, target a question for each one of the panelists based on their presentations and the themes from before. And then we're going to end with a lightning round before we open it up to a broader question and answer. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Ruben, and he's gonna kick us off.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being around and being invited. So I'm Ruben Tins. I work for the corporate strategy department out of our Amsterdam office in the Netherlands, so Europe. But I'm happy to be here. So yeah, I work for RG. We are just being acquired by Chevron. But other than that, we are just a bunch of very passionate people that day by day are actually, thriving on making decarbonization happening, and not just in the future, but already now as we speak. So we produce biodiesel and renewable diesel from a range of feedstocks, mainly oils, grays, and fats. So the harder to run feedstocks, and based on our capabilities of pre-treatment, we are able to make really nice fuels out of that without modification of your engine actually already run. And it already saves CO2 today. We don't have to wait for the solution in that sense tomorrow. Just referring back to the panel before, we can make it happen today, and we are getting to more scale as we speak. So, we are already getting to more investments. So we are investing in Geismar, Louisiana, our big renewable diesel plant. So we're beefing it up to scale as we speak. A bit more about what RG does today. So, we procure feedstocks around the globe. So we have global operations. We are really getting the feedstock, from Asia, Africa, India, Europe, South America, actually. And then we, depending on our linear program, basically we're sending to the right plants, and then we figure out where to market those fuels. So the feedstocks are being, refined either to biodiesel or renewable diesel, and they find homes either in aviation in the near term, but already now rail and road, and also marine is like a big space for us because more and more that's an emerging market where the big vessels already are running on biodiesel as we speak. So in our mission to help fight climate change, basically, we produce about, say, 500 million gallons a year, so 500 million actually, and that reduces quite significant amounts of CO2 already. And we're just happy to help out with this kind of solutions. Again, it takes quite some number of EVs, for instance, at the current grid average. So keep in mind, right? I'm happy to say that we really need all of the solutions available, not just the liquid fuels that we make. So we're definitely supportive of EV as well, but we also have to think that through because EV obviously runs on the grid averages. So today, for instance, as a comparison, our biodiesel is already 65% better in terms of CO2 reduction than any EV that runs on the grid average of the US, simply because electricity needs to come from places, right? And today it doesn't get much from renewable places, so that means that there's still a lot of CO2 being emitted in power generation. Up to you.
Fantastic, thanks. So I'm Bill Goodwin with Joby Aviation. Let's see if I can't cue us up. A little bit different than making biodiesel. We're building an all-electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, an electric airplane. We've raised more than $2.2 billion to build, develop, manufacture, and operate this aircraft. That's why we talk about ourselves as a vertically integrated transportation company. And we're launching an app-based service targeting 2024. So this is a real technology. And one of the things I think that's interesting and very complementary to what you're going to hear from the rest of the folks in the panel is the uniquely, I think, infrastructure-light way in which a vehicle like this can operate. And just so you know what the vehicle can actually do before I dive into some points about infrastructure, the aircraft can take off and land like a helicopter, as you see it doing there, and then it transitions onto the wing to fly effectively as an electric airplane. This is our full-size prototype flying without a pilot. It is remotely piloted for testing purposes, but this will be piloted. And as you can see, it can go 150-mile range, has room for 4 passengers with a pilot, a top speed of 200 miles an hour, and when we say 10-plus years in development, we're actually now at 14 years of development. So couple that with our partnership with Toyota, who invested close to $500 million, our partnership with Uber, and you begin to realize that this technology has both some merit in its maturity, but also has an interesting role to play if you start to think of mobility as a system. I skipped ahead. I should have left it on that slide there, but I just want to say is the closing note is, and I think we'll come back to in the questions for Joby, is what role do unique and interesting and complementary mobility systems play in this decarbonization challenge. Because we are an EV play, but we're very different than personally owned EVs. We're going to operate the aircraft as a service, and as a result, our mandate is high utilization of a limited number of vehicles. So that will help with a lot of the sustainability challenges associated with personally owned EVs. So that's part of the thesis of the company. One of the other challenges is, of course, what's coming off the grid. And so those are the types of challenges that are easier for us to mediate as a company, managing our inputs into this system. So that's what I'll leave, I think, folks with is mobility as a system, and how does that way of thinking change how you look at the decarbonization challenge?
Good morning, everybody. How are you all today? Good. I love a little bit of energy. And I also, I have to admit, I'm pretty excited about the crowd. We've got a good percentage of really smart women in this group as well. And we got to point it out. So thank you all for being here. I mean, I'm sure you men are smart too, but, you know, we'll see. But this is my third speech this week. But what's really cool about this one is I'm often in rooms with just hydrogen players. And so I love to be amongst you all, and I love to be part of what an ecosystem could look like. And, you know, Ruben, you mentioned it, you know, we support all fuels, you know, all clean fuels, and we're gonna need to get together to make sure that we are delivering on our promises to meet our goals by 2050. So a little bit about myself. I have been with Plug in different iterations for over 20 years, but I left to do some other kinds of consulting, and I came back last January. And the reason why I came back is, who wouldn't want to be part of this exciting time for hydrogen? It's a great place to be, and I'm really excited to be part of Plug. We are also a vertically integrated company, and we are focused on everything from the creation of the green hydrogen. We produce, manufacture the fuel cells, we sell the fuel cells, we liquefy the hydrogen, you name it, we do it. And the reason why we do all of this is because, let me see what my next slide says. We started out when our CEO came online about 15 years ago, and he came on because he had commercialization experience, and he looked at all the things that we were doing, and he said, you know, we're really gonna focus. We're gonna focus on material handling systems, so forklifts for distribution centers like Amazon. And if you think about it, it's really the same technology as we're going to talk about in a little bit that you're going to use at ports. It's just different sizes, and we make it work. But what happened was we started to get really good at these fuel cell forklifts. And companies like Amazon, Walmart, they want you to deliver on the whole thing. They say you're going to have hydrogen here, you're going to have fuel cells here, what else can you do for us? Oh, and by the way, if you're going to bring us that hydrogen, make sure that you're bringing it to us and it's clean enough. So we had to look internally and make a decision. What are we going to do? How do we make sure we have enough hydrogen, and how do we make sure that it's clean enough? Well, then you make it yourself. And so we are, as a New York company, we have generation that we're building in New York and around the world, and we'll have about 500 tons of green hydrogen by 2025. And if anyone wants to visit our plant that we're building right now outside of Buffalo, New York, it's our stamp facility. We would love to host you. And again, it's green hydrogen, and we're super excited about it. But again, these are some of the things that we're making and we're working on right now. We've got our fuel cell applications. We do everything from the material handling systems that we discussed, but then we also have stationary power for shore power, and also you can use it for charging EV vehicles. And then we're also manufacturing our own electrolyzers. We're building a gigafactory in Rochester, New York, and then we are also building some other facilities near Albany where we're headquartered for more manufacturing. We're also working all around the world. And I think that one of the things that I need to mention is one of the ports we're really excited about is we are building generation at the port of Antwerp-Bruges. and Belgium and Flanders. Actually, you got to separate those two when you talk about it. But Europe is a really exciting opportunity for us. It's a really exciting opportunity for all clean fuels. But as we look at the opportunities there, we're excited. And we'll talk about this a little more, but I just want to end this part of what I'll say is how ports really are the whole ecosystem for everything that we're trying to do. We can generate the hydrogen there, the products are there, and we think that we're going to be a helpful solution to meeting the goals. Thanks. And I don't know how to use PowerPoint. I've got strengths and weaknesses like all of you.
That's it. There's no slide. So is this working?
okay,
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Adam Clabber. I'm the Vice President of both Sustainability and ESG for World Energy. And World Energy, in case you're not familiar with us, we are currently North America's only commercial scale provider, producer of sustainable aviation fuel. We also have renewable diesel. We have our production plant in California. We also have an additional 5 biodiesel plants across North America. And then we have some other exciting news. So we've got expansion at our Paramount, California plant. We are moving to about 250 million gallons a year of sustainable aviation fuel supply based on lipid technology. And that's currently producing 1,300 jobs and constructions for 3 years until we're ready in 2025. We also have announced recently in Canada, off the coast of Newfoundland, a 3 gigawatt green hydrogen project where we already have the permits. That will be likely delivering volumes either in green methanol or green ammonia to the EU, and we're already in the process of offtakes with Europe. It also could be an input for sustainable aviation fuel. We're looking at power to liquid as our next technology application. And in Houston, where we're building plant number 2 for SAF, there'll be a PTL or power to liquid facility as well as a HEFA plant. So we believe that there's a place for existing technology like HEFA, and we've shown that we can produce that. We also understand that there are limits and we need to look at multiple feedstocks. Something that's worth noting is that we need an all-above strategy. It can't just be power to liquid, and in fact, we know that there are other end uses for renewable power, and that perhaps for additionality's sake, but also because there are other applications and economics, we want to make sure that buildings and light-duty transport also gets their wind and solar power. One other last piece that I'll add to World Energy is we really believe in energy transition. So we need solutions that get better than 50%, 80% carbon reduction. That's really important that we move quickly. We've got to build these facilities. There are some measures, potentially with co-processing, that are suggesting that we can use existing facilities to drive down carbon. What we just can't do is wait. And what may happen is the banks get mixed signals and they think, oh, well, we'll just move feedstock to existing infrastructure. The challenge with that is at a certain point, we have to drive these emissions down below 50% and beyond. And if we're using existing infrastructure, it just delays that. So let's innovate together. Let's get to solutions that are better than 80%. And also for comparison, there's a lot of talk about electric aviation. It's an excellent solution. And hydrogen. Everything has a carbon footprint over its life cycle. And in fact, our product already achieves comparable or better levels than, for example, looking at electric aviation and including the impacts from sourcing lithium mines and for green hydrogen, the supply chain and its footprint as well. We get comparable levels of carbon performance. So let's not discount existing technologies. Let's move forward, but also we need to invest in energy transition.
Thanks, everybody. We're now going to move into the panelist discussion, and I think just before we move into that, if you were looking for a message in that group of presentations, besides a bunch of kind of cool stuff, it's that it's not one thing, it's everything, right? It's a system. We got to start now, and we got to kind of deliver it and deliver performance as we go along. All right. So first question is going to be kind of a lightning round. Each panelist, I just need one or two sentences that are in direct response to the panelists that were here about an hour ago, right? We got a chance to hear from key port tenants and stakeholders about the kind of key challenges that they have now and into the future, let's say within the next 5 years. So what I really want each panelist to address is at least one of the following two questions. The first one is, what do you have or know about that addresses an immediate need, ready to go now, that you want to partner on? The second thing is, whether you provide it or not, what are the big moonshot issues based on the challenges that were identified by the stakeholders that we believe by working together we can solve in a reasonable time frame, not 30 years out, but within the next 5 years. So I can either let somebody go first, or I call on somebody. Who wants to go first?
Happy to take this one on. So I'm going to combine the responses. I think that what we all need to come to grips with quickly is that this is going to be expensive. And there have been recent reports, the Mission Possible Partnership has an excellent roadmap, and they're showing it's about $175 billion a year in price premium that we have to put onto aviation. And that's obviously a tall order. That's about equivalent to the amount of investment in Airbus and Boeing's aircraft on an annual basis. So the sooner the public and all of us understand that we have to pay this, the sooner we'll get the resources and the capital delivered to build the infrastructure and reach those targets. But I think that's something that we really need to embrace, that this is going to be expensive. And us collectively having that message and working together to meet and raise that capital, that we can do this, but we all need to be on board and understand that this cannot be done on the cheap.
That's an immediate recognition, though. Is that a forever conclusion that you have, or is that just a, hey, it's
$175 billion a year through 2050, not to say forever, but a long time.
Okay. And that was the full response, or was it our backside to it? Just real quick.
Backside.
You said you combine the two. Is there the second part of a big kind of, it's like, okay, it's going to cost us some money, but the value's there. Is there a kind of, where should that money go? Where should the first dollars go, and what's the biggest problem that they should solve that is solvable within the next 5 years? And if you want to think about that, we can go to another one, but that's where...
Yeah, that's easy. So we need to start building these plants immediately, right? And we need commercial scale plants for sustainable aviation fuel, green hydrogen, and advance wherever we can, electric aviation as well. But I think it's mobilizing capital and getting the banks on board, seeing that there's a willingness to pay, and start building now.
Boom. Who's next?
I'm next.
All right, Aaron.
I'm going to take the answer in a little different direction. I'm going to offer some specific examples of what we can do now, and I'm going to do it in the context of the ports. I've got my cheat sheet here. As I mentioned before, we are also a fuel cell company, and so we provide products that we think that could have immediate response to answering some of the issues. I don't want to say issues. To complement what's happening in the ports. So things like terminal tractors, we're ready to go on those. Rubber tire gantry cranes, ground support equipment, those kinds of things. The shore power that we talked about. These are all products that we can mobilize today, get them to the ports, and they can be used to help with reducing their GHG issues. So those are products that we can go with. Longer term, some of the things that moonshot kind of, we call it the hydrogen shot at Department of Energy, things that we need to work on are spending time really thinking about green hydrogen and some of the other sustainable fuels for marine aviation, those kinds of things. I know you guys are ready to go, but on the fuel cell side, it might take a little bit longer, and we're excited about it, and we want to do it.
I need a quick follow-up on that.
Yeah.
On that moonshot,
Yes.
hydrogen shot. What is the, and you specifically reference ports between like Plug Power and your industry and the ports. What is the partnership that gets to the solution look like in your mind? Because I'd like to maybe after you talk about it, we get to Q&A. I'd like to see if people agree with you. Hopefully they want to go. I assume they will. But.
I assume they will too. No, I would just say that I'll use the Port of Antwerp Bruges as an example. I think when you're working with ports, which are often in disadvantaged communities, which I think that helps too, and I think that's another point that I want to make. Anytime we're thinking about new energy sources, we really do have to think about how it is benefiting disadvantaged communities, and it's benefiting our climate and thinking about it holistically. So that's an important note, and that's a big part of what we're working on with the Department of Energy, so I needed to bring that up. But the Port of Antwerp Bruges and a lot of ports sometimes have the land that we need, and we would be able to produce that green hydrogen on site, hopefully with the ability to couple it with renewables as well. Use that green hydrogen and then deploy the end uses as we discussed before, simply with the fuel cells, and then also heavy-duty trucking is a really big one that is important to our industry and important to our company. And then as you get further down the line, that partnership includes the marine and aviation and others.
Thanks. The first specific question is going to go to Bill first. So Bill, you answer it, and then we're going to have Ruben, and then we'll come back to you. So a quick one on what can you do now? Obviously, your solution, but what do we need in 5 years?
Gotcha. Well, now is a relative term in aviation. Now isn't today so much as it is today.
Yeah.
But
except
within
you started your presentation with "We're ready now," and Adam ended it with "We got to go now." So, however you define now, give me a now.
So we do need to operate now, but I think one of the important lessons, and I will credit the Port Authority here for actually being a big champion of this, is recognizing that you don't need to create obstacles to getting started. So we're a great example of that. An air taxi service is an interesting opportunity to start adding a new mode of transportation to the city. And we're going to do something that's piloted, that works within the existing regulatory environment, that can operate in the existing airspace, that can fly like a helicopter or like a plane. So you don't need to solve for the end state in order to get something done today. And that's because private companies like ours have designed ourselves to work within the electrification investments that have been made, the way that the system works today. So that's...
Hey, can I ask you real quick on solving that? And that's both from your perspective and a lot of the obstacles, both the obstacles from the supplier perspective and the obstacles from the customer or authority perspective, are actually reasonable, rational business rules that define what they need. Got any hints on how to actually cut through that obstacles? Because they may think it's like, why don't you understand our rules? Just follow them, right? So it's like, what's the model like for you? What did you find as a lesson learned from your experience in working with the port and others that says, oh, that will really work. We should do that more and more. And if we did that, there'd be less obstacles, there'd be more streamlined solutions, and there'd be more wins.
Yeah, well, from one bill to another bill, I will say I'm going to avoid the false dichotomy that you seem to be setting up here. We don't view ourselves as antagonistic to the port at all, and to the rules that exist today. I think that's one of the unique things about what we have tried to do is, how do we find a willing partner? And there is where the Port Authority comes in. They really have been an incredible partner in saying, hey, using where we are today, how can we actually begin to operate a service? And then over time, change the rules in a way that still serves the same needs that animated those underlying regulations to begin with. So I'd say that my compliment to the Port Authority is taking a kind of brass tacks, very practical look at what's going to be required for electric aviation and what problems it can solve, because it can't solve all the problems today. Certainly, it will be an interesting complement to the system of today, but it won't be the end-all, be-all.
Yeah, and while provocative, it wasn't intended to be antagonistic. It was just to reflect the kind of, there's a lot of frustration in innovation that often is directly tied to just the parties not fully understanding the interests of the other parties. And so it's just like, okay.
I think that's, yeah, I think
it's
that's a
just
good
like,
point.
what was your secret sauce in getting through that? That was the point of the question. All right, moonshot.
So I guess the moonshot here is more of an admonition as opposed to a call to action, because we're coming at this from the private company perspective. We were VC backed. We put massive amounts of private capital at risk and not been depending on kind of government directed funding. I think one of the most important things from being from that community is don't pick winners early. We have a variety of different technologies up here that are all be complementary. And it's important not to try to limit the universe of what's eligible for interesting opportunities, whether they be government programs that are investments or opportunities to partner with government actors. Because again, our disposition at Joby has always been private capital should provide the investment, whether it's for the infrastructure, for the opportunities to deploy the service, and we've raised a huge amount of money in order to do that. But I think it's important for the long-term vitality of this ecosystem is to not necessarily pick winners. And don't think, Adam, it went unnoticed, the subtle jab at hydrogen and electric. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
All right, Ruben, and then we'll be back to Bill.
Yeah, so today we already can serve you with decarbonization solutions, right? So if there's one thing we have to offer today, it's definitely our fuels today in a lot of the sectors, right? From marine to road to rail, or heating and also mining. If we want to, we can do aviation. Now we are Chevron backed, so we also have a plant in California that is producing SAF if we wish. So yeah, we can offer it today. So that's definitely where we believe we can play in a role and are playing a role. So we don't have to wait for the technologies of the future, although it's great to have those as part of the total solution, because we believe we need it all, right? Let's be very clear there. When I met the folks in the panel here, that's one of the first things we mentioned to each other, like, you know, I would be very happy for a climate if the folks next to me are very successful in what they do, because that means that we are getting closer to the target. And that being said, if you're then asking for like what's the moonshot, I think.
So 5 years ago, where do you want to be, and where do they want to be, and do you want to be there together?
Oh yeah, absolutely together. But you know, we need to get to scale. I think that's the big team. I think what we are hearing today. Together it takes a lot of capital, and if I just think of the history of our own company, we were at some point, I almost would say, struggling to get our big expansion of Geismar done, because we were basically just putting it in perspective, placing a bet of our total market capitalization of NASDAQ at that time, just for one expansion. We managed to get it done, but that was like it took a lot of work and a lot of, you know, even the US board had to say, wow, are we going to place that big bet, and are we going to make that happen? So to get to scale, I think you have to think in two elements. One is voluntary, one is mandates, right? I believe that our governments around the globe need to really have strong policies in place to ensure that we together can make those investments happen, right? If you are talking with banks or communities, it's really important to have that strong power behind you saying, we want this and we want it now. And then from a voluntary perspective, and I know Adam is also, I think, already part there, is like people like the Smart Trade Center framework, right? Where we are thinking of a way to get a credible framework that helps us verify what we are doing in terms of CO2 reduction and how to trade those attributes separately from the physical fuel. That sounds complex, but what it really entails is that anybody in this room, especially if you take a plane today, you are not owning the engine, but we can sell you the CO2 reduction to lower your footprint, right? But to do so, we need a truly transparent and credible framework, and we need a lot of folks working together to get that credible to the marketplace.
Great.
So,
because we're going to talk a little bit more about that in your question. All right, so that gives you a sense. It's like in the pre-discussion, in the last panel, in this one, you know, everybody raised kind of 5 kind of key issues, and we want to talk about those in detail. Mandates, public incentives, enabling infrastructure, market leadership, and transparency. Each one of the panelists are going to address one of the 4 areas, and then we're going to end with a group thing, both these guys and you guys out there, about a 5th. So after each speaks, then it's open season. We're going to start with Bill and Joby, and this is about enabling infrastructure. First, I want to compliment you as you mentioned a VC-backed firm that described your technology with an amazing amount of humility when you said it might have some merit. So it's just like, but I think it does put into context the kind of challenges of getting a solution and getting it out there, even if it's a first step, right? So, and for you, you've got a zero carbon, essentially a zero carbon solution. As you indicated, it is infrastructure light, but it still requires infrastructure, and that is critical to a whole bunch of infrastructure that's out there, from electric vehicles to a solar panel. They got to be connected to something. There has to be some infrastructure to work for it. And you pointed out in your remarks that a lot of that investment can and should come from you, but it's not the only place it should come from. So I'd like you to talk about what are the infrastructure partnerships and investments that you need? What do they look like? What do you bring to the table? And what does accelerating that infrastructure investment mean in the rapid scaling versus the inability to scale? Because an awful lot of great solutions don't scale because they don't have the infrastructure to support them, and the public and the marketplace gets tired. So if you could start with that one real quick.
Yeah, so I think you raise a couple of interesting questions. The first is, what's needed for an industry like ours to get off the ground? Sorry for the painful pun. But the reality is it's remarkably little compared to a lot of other folks in the EV space. By necessity, we are a service that is going to be using a limited number of aircraft to the greatest amount, which means that we're going to be complementary to a lot of investments that are already being made. So if you think about what Joby's trying to do, is to be another service that will fit into the system of systems that makes up mobility in the cities today, and solve some of those trips that are hardest to solve on the ground, and hardest to solve whether it's by rail, bus rapid transit, individual car, or micromobility. So we're going to target a particular kind of form of mobility that is hard for anybody else to solve. There will be latent demand issues, but by our very design, we're not going to be the individually operated substitute for a car, which means that we're going to be a much more leanly operated service. And because we're an infrastructure nimble firm, if you will, our investments can be complementary to other investments that cities are already making or private actors are already making. So we have a partnership with Reef Parking, for instance, which is one of the biggest parking operators in the United States. They're looking at how to better utilize existing underutilized parking garages that often have entire floors, especially the top floor, that just aren't used, and they're not monetizing them particularly well. Well, if we can add to a parking garage that's already being electrified for charging on the ground floor and make a marginal addition of electrification to the roof, that might be something that private capital could do entirely on its own, because the relative cost of running additional copper to the roof really isn't that extreme. And so what we've done with Joby is by shaping this as a service that allows for that kind of complementary type of investment, we can look at the whole panoply of ways that you would get to electrification of future vertiports. It could be public-private partnerships with parking authorities that are trying to do this themselves, city-owned parking authorities or regional parking authorities. It could be purely private actors with whom we have many different relationships. And it could, of course, be by direct public investment if that's something that's desired. And there you see a lot of multimodal centers, places like transit hubs, where they'd love to put a service like ours on top of the roof of some place where subways and trains and buses are all unified.
One quick follow-up, and then we're going to move on to Aaron. You talked about kind of infrastructure light and a lack of kind of big infrastructure dependence. That's clearly a competitive advantage to you, right? But do you think that approach is kind of a shared view that's taking hold within the industry, or is it more unique to your approach, particularly in the decarbonization space?
I think it's characteristic of the leading eVTOL players, and will be true for the foreseeable future. I do think that there's an business incentive to keep things as light as possible. So I think that there's a shared ethos there amongst us and our competitors. So
great. Thanks, Bill. All right, we're going to move to Aaron and Plug. You guys were a leader in investment in hydrogen, and well before the Infrastructure Act or the Inflation Reduction Act. But you also made it very clear, as a number of the speakers did earlier, that those acts, unprecedented level by the federal government, are kind of game changers. So it's not the money is out there. It's like, okay, what are we going to do with it? What are your perspectives on both letting everybody know what that means for your business, but also what it should mean for them and how to work together to advance those types of solutions?
So talking about the Inflation Reduction Act is probably my favorite thing to talk about right now. It truly was a game changer. And not just for the United States, we're seeing in a lot of technologies, it's pushing other countries to take a look at their policies and see how they're going to move quicker and what they need to do to meet our goals. So very specific to hydrogen is there is a production tax credit included in there for $3 per kilogram for the cleanest of hydrogen. It is technology neutral as far as the hydrogen goes, meaning that you don't just have to be green or renewably generated hydrogen to get the credit. You need to be clean, and there is a scale in which the amount that you can get for the credit. It's a really big deal. It's very exciting. And like I said, I've had conversations with folks. This is Climate Week. And so there are people in this city from all over the world looking at what they're doing and how it's going to move the markets. And this is really exciting. Also included in the Inflation Reduction Act is their extensions of the investment tax credits for renewables, so solar and wind and fuel cells and others, which is also helping to move the needle. There's tax credits in there or making things better for carbon capture and sequestration. So it's just everything to drive the economy for clean energy was part of this. Was it a perfect bill? No, there's never a perfect bill, and it's always about negotiations and getting where we're going. But for us as a company, we're really excited about what it means, where we know that it's going to put green hydrogen in a better place, and it's going to make us cost competitive with other forms of electricity and hydrogen and such as moving forward. I also want to, in my limited time, talk about the bipartisan infrastructure package that passed last year. And this is why I'm here today, because we're really excited to be in partnership with the Port Authority in the New York Northeast hub, because included in that bipartisan package was $8 billion for hydrogen hubs across the United States. And then there was another $1.5 billion for electrolyzers, and then also for manufacturing and recycling. But the hubs, that $8 billion, what's really interesting is it sounds like a lot of money, right? But it's not a lot of money. If you think about what really needs to be done to build out the ecosystem across the country, we look at that as an opportunity, and it's really seed money, and it's bringing a lot of players to the table. We're very clear at Plug. We want a lot of winners, to really make this work and to build out that infrastructure and do everything from the generation of that hydrogen to the end use of the hydrogen and the distribution of that hydrogen. It's going to take a lot of us. It's going to take a lot of teamwork, and we're super excited about it. That is also driving the rest of the world too.
Thanks. And it's interesting. You pointed out it's not a lot of money, and we were about to transition to Adams, whose point was we need a lot of money. So we're going to talk about a lot of money and market leadership, because I think you've heard from Bill, we've heard from Aaron that a lot of really cool solutions are ready to go right now, that there's an unprecedented amount of money in there. The panel before us was really clear that they're ready to lead. You've made a really compelling argument both in the prep and today that market leadership is absolutely essential, that leaders make markets, right? So kind of looking at the people in the room, what they do when they go forward and leading over the next several years. What's your advice to them on what they should lead on and work together on, both as port stakeholders and with industries? And then the second point is, obviously, the authority can have a market influence, but who are the kind of critical players outside of here, both within the region and nationally? We can keep it within the United States, public, private, not-for-profit, that need to lead, so this thing is not just a zero carbon port, it's a zero carbon economy across the region and across the country.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, I think in terms of, I take this in reverse order, we already are seeing this leadership on the federal level and the integration between the DOE programs and the DOT programs. Transport obviously is a huge place for solutions, and we need to deliver them quickly. And we're seeing that mobilization, whether it's the Investment Reduction Act or other policy maneuvers on the federal side, that is really supporting that and working together across agencies. I think that people can support it on a state level by expanding the low carbon fuel standard when it comes to fuels. California can't move the entire nation in terms of market leaders. Yes, California has helped to establish sustainable aviation fuel as a viable industry. And now we need to see that more widely spread so we can start to deliver at other locations and build out the infrastructure and supply chains to get it to other parts of the country. So I think a New York low carbon fuel standards across the country beyond just the West Coast would be very useful and helpful, and for people in this room to support that policy measure would be useful. I think the other piece that people can do is you could ask for these solutions yourselves from your airlines, from your shippers, et cetera, on the marine side. They may not have the solutions for you today, but they'll listen to you and understand that there's this demand, and that I think that is a key piece, because the voluntary contributions to cover price premiums can complement the policy measures. Government policy can only be so smart. It can only provide that, say, baseline. You've got market pressures that will adjust the pricing of our fuels, and to cover that price premium, the voluntary market is well positioned to cover that. So I think ask for the low carbon solutions from your service providers, and support the policy measures at the state and federal level to support this industry.
And I assume just based on your combined points, and work together as hard as you can to kind of ante up and get as much of the federal dollars as you can possibly get.
Absolutely.
Really? Right. All right, we're gonna end with Ruben, and then we're gonna open it up for both the panel and you guys. And Ruben's going to address market transparency. Markets need leaders. That's really clear. But sustainable and scalable markets need transparent, reliable, and accessible market information, so that the value that's established by the leaders can actually be transacted, and that the leaders have others that are going to follow as quickly as possible to scale. That was a key theme in the last panel. What are your thoughts on the priority actions that have to take place in terms of market transparency and expansion to get where we need to go as quickly as possible?
Sure. Yeah, I like to pick it up where Adam basically stopped, right? He's saying, like, go to your service provider and ask for cleaner fuels, for instance, or decarbonization solutions. Where I like to take it, or a lot of the folks that are working on this solution already, I'd like to take it, is where you directly can go to the market and say, we offer the CO2 reduction solution, or if you're in need of that solution, you go directly to the producer or anybody in that supply chain, instead of just your service provider, because that's typically where the complexity starts. So what I'm trying to say is, if there is a framework that allows for a book and claim system, where you as a shipper, for instance, using a Maersk or alike, for you're sending a parcel with a vessel, instead of going to the vessel owner saying, hey, can you just help me reduce the footprint of this movement by using some kind of a biofuel or whatever you do, you now directly can actually, based on this smart rate center book and claim system, offer a credible CO2 reduction, right? And that's basically what we are after, right? It's not that we are selling the fuel, it's really about the solution. So what we need, to your point, is a framework that is really, let's say, drafted in such a way that it is pragmatical at some point, because we also have to make it work in practice. That gets the right credits from the marketplace, and that is verifiable, right? So that people say, if you implement this framework, there are third-party auditors that can help you audit what you are doing, so that everybody understands what you're doing is right. And if that all happens, then I believe that the flexibility and the opportunities that come with that are enormous, right? And that's not just my biofuel, it also goes for the green hydrogen or any other application. It's really about getting tied into the infrastructure, make sure that your green solution hits the grid. And then it's almost like a rack system where you can say, because I can ensure that happened and I own the attributes of my solution, let's just broaden it a bit, then you can sell that CO2 reduction to whoever is in need of it. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity for us.
Great, thanks. All right, we're now moving into the next phase. It's going to involve the panel and you guys. We're going to start with one question, but then after that question's answered, any questions you guys want to ask, any question the panel wants to ask you is kind of open. So this one, and there is going to be a microphone kind of floating around if you want to put your hand up. But here's the last one. The last one is about mandates. In today's remarks, in the discussion with our panelists, the word mandate was only used one time in our panelist prep session, and I think it was only 2 times in your actual panel, and that was by you at the very end of the presentation, right? Even though you ended with what we need is some transparency in the marketplace. Mandates didn't come up a lot in the first panel. So the kind of opening question that I've got for you, and particularly given that we talked about the transformative nature of not just leadership, but the federal government's action, the most comprehensive in U.S. history, which is dominated by incentives and investments and tries to avoid mandates. So here's the kind of question, kind of simple one. Are we moving past mandates? Right? That's the kind of first question. And okay, if we're moving past it, it's probably not the case that mandates won't be needed. If you look at the progression of regulatory policy, if you look at the fact that it's expensive because the impacts and the externalities are not on the books, and as soon as you put them on the books, suddenly the market adjusts, right? So it's like, both for you guys and you guys, are there mandates you think are essential to the acceleration of the solution that you are most interested in? If we've got to move everything together, mandates are going to make sense as a policy option for certain things. So from the panel or for the audience, anybody want to go first with the mandates? Are we past them? If we're not past them, what are the ones that should be prioritized?
Happy to take it.
Great.
Yeah. So talking about mandates, for sure we need those, right? So it's what I can see, for instance, in Europe is that the member states with the strongest policies also realize the highest GHG reduction. So it's really the Kickstarter, and it still is, right? And yes, there's this big voluntary space now that more people say, mainly the corporate saying, we like to be green, we like to have a lower footprint, but mainstream is still driven by mandates, right? And you need that to get to scale. There's no way around it.
So as a follow-up for you and the audience, does that mean, and this is particularly as we think about a global problem with global companies investing huge dollars and making commitments, ESG and decarbonization commitments to international markets, does the United States government policymakers at both the federal, state, and local level, do they to some extent have their heads in the sand, or is it just they've taken advantage of the political moment to advance a really groundbreaking measure? It's like, do you think they'll be back at mandates, and if so, when will it be? And if they don't and they miss the boat, will the marketplace punish the companies that just follow the path of incentives? And you could answer that, or somebody else could. But yeah, why don't you jump in real quick, Ruben, and then Bill's going.
I think they're in a great pathway there with the Inflation Reduction Act, but that's still federal level, right? And there are a lot of additional incentives within North America. But what we really are after, I think what we really need is joining forces, especially for aviation and marine, because it's so international. And if you don't do it together, it will not happen simply because of competition.
Great. Is there anybody in the audience who wants to jump in before Bill does? All right. Bill, you're up.
So I would say I'd reverse that.
Whoa, wait, hold on.
Wow.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Just tell us who you are. And
Josh Jacobs, Director of Sustainability, WAP Sustainability. I think the question's accurate, but incentivized mandates are happening. And Inflation Reduction Act has $5.3 billion for the U.S. federal government to purchase low carbon materials. legislation didn't define low carbon. We're working on that. That's kind of a fall down in the legislature. But they're also working with 17 individual states, over 50 authorities having jurisdiction at the municipal level. So a mandate, you need to separate the mandates. One is a law that is a stick. One is a carrot that incentivizes the change. So do this, you get money in procurement, for example. So
Yeah,
an
it's a standard-
incentivized
I'm with
mandate.
you. It's a standard public policy tool when the government wants to achieve an outcome. They have two bookended options. They tell you what to do, or they encourage you to do it through incentives, right? And
Right.
the truth lies somewhere in between. Or, I mean, where they end up usually is somewhere in between. But I agree with you completely.
Right, so incentivized mandates are happening now and are working. So I would say, yeah, we need them, but you need the right ones.
Yeah. To just put a little bit finer point on it, it's like we talked a lot when the Democrats first started talking about the bill about things like a carbon tax and a carbon constraint, a price on the pricing of the externality. It was rejected outright by Senator Manchin, and we ended up with, well, you could do whatever you want, it's going to cost you, but it's going to cost you because we're going to subsidize the heck out of the stuff that we want to do, and we're going to subsidize the heck out of the R&D that's going to push the development. But yeah, completely agree. All right, Bill.
So I'd take the conversation a little bit away from the IRA towards my perspective, which is from the city level, and how you change the consumer behavior that's occasioning all of this carbon-generating activity. And what I'd say, instead of a mandate, is what you need to remove the subsidies for the other behaviors that drive people into cars. And that takes a lot of precision that is at the local level to change how people are incentivized or encouraged to move in a car-centric way, or in ways that frankly don't make the most sense. So you look at the history of parking minimums in the United States, which is finally getting a change at the city level. People were required to build so many parking spots for any kind of new development that I think right now in Los Angeles there's something like 7 parking spots at any given point for anybody who's in Los Angeles. So we literally have 7x the parking for the human beings. That type of policy change isn't a mandate, but if you remove basically a subsidy for another form of transportation, organically, you're going to see people go back to the highest and best, most efficient technology to solve for a certain problem. You see this in Copenhagen and Amsterdam, which were overrun with cars in the 70s. Now people think of them as bike utopias, but if you go back to the press articles, they were just as vitriolic about how, no, the Danes drive. Danes do not ride bicycles. And there's been a wholesale transition, mostly because they took away the artificial incentives that people may view as mandates, and that has a radical effect that's completely disconnected from trying to pick winners in a marketplace and find some way to incentivize them and then force that change
So they also
down inorganically.
heavily, because I just came back from there a couple weeks ago, they also heavily discouraged cars, right? You pay a huge tax if you want a car in Copenhagen, and they have a lot of supportive infrastructure. But and that's kind of, we're going to transition to the next.
But I will respond to the supportive infrastructure in relative scale is minute compared to the subsidy for car infrastructure. So I think that that's what I'm saying, is that you have to look at what are you subsidizing that's causing people to choose one thing, and you remove that, and you can say it's an investment in something else, or you can say you're removing some of the investment that you would have otherwise made to subsidize a particular
agree.
behavior.
But as a city, the level of infrastructure investment and systems favoring the current patterns, just like the ones that created the last pattern, is stunning and unique for an awful lot of cities around the world. So I agree with you, but it's just like, I don't want what they did was a big deal. So let's shift the mandate discussion away from governments at any level, and let's talk about it in terms of private leadership. In many ways, a company saying, we're only going to buy a solution that meets these characteristics, don't even bother to bid. It's more like, same as, you can't bid on my thing if you don't have a minimum safety score of X, right? A lot of what's happening in the private sector is not just about value, it's about risk mitigation and anticipated risk. What do you think are the big mandates that some of the private actors here could advance almost immediately into their supply chain in a reasonable period of time and get just as much market transformation on certain areas as the federal government could, or a state like California? Any thoughts? And I'd love to hear if there's any thoughts from the audience.
Got one. So I had a question in the last panel and asking what the banks request or what their communication is with the airlines and what their requirements around ESG or climate goals. I think a huge one could be that banks can require their clients to also reduce their emissions from their assets, right? So if you've got aircraft that burn a certain amount of fuel and you need to get to net zero under your goals, then you have to find a way for your portfolio of investments to get to net zero. So if the banks have climate-aligned goals and they implement, then they will need to figure out a way, and maybe they'll make direct investments in green hydrogen as well as owning a portfolio of aircraft. So maybe those things go together, and they have to figure out what is a meaningful way to combine their assets so the ones that are creating emissions are then compensated for other assets in the new green economy for net zero. So they actually own an equal or greater amount of investment on the climate positive, climate aligned side of the balance sheet.
So Aaron, just your perspective, what would that do for you guys? What would that do for Plug? Is that a good move?
I think that sounds like a fantastic idea.
All right, let's. Now it's time for you guys to ask some questions. If you don't ask some questions, the panelists are going to ask you some questions. So, who wants to go first? Anybody? Yeah, right up here. And if you could just mention your name and your organization.
Sure, my name is Brian Wilkie. I work for National Grid, focused on vehicle electrification. I was just curious how your companies think about power as it relates to your business model, whether it's infrastructure or the conversion of electric power for the creation of hydrogen and grid constraints, and how you work with utilities sort of proactively to remove some of those barriers. It's very self-serving.
Oh, but it's an outstanding question because it can't be ignored. Who wants to
And
go
I'll
first?
give you a very self-serving answer. We're obviously very close partners with National Grid, and we really appreciate that partnership and are working really closely on specific projects like the project I mentioned earlier, STAMP in Western New York, but also in the hubs. And we think about electricity all of the time. You can't have green hydrogen if you don't have clean electricity that comes at a good price. And it's as simple as that. Is if we're going with all the incentives in the world, if we can't make that hydrogen with economical electricity, it's a problem. And so we work with utilities like yours all of the time, and that partnership is going to be more important as we move forward. And you talked about it earlier too. We need more renewables. This isn't just about hydrogen. It's about making sure that we are creating the cleanest, best electricity here in the United States, here in New York, and across the world, and finding the time and space to do it.
Hey, Brian, can I ask you a quick question based on Aaron's? You talked about things like capacity and issues for the utility. What do you think from your perspective is your most important issue that's also probably Aaron's most important issue that it'd be better off to solve together, and if you solve them together, would be a direct benefit to clients like the ports that are huge energy users, right?
Yeah, so so again, viewing this world through my lens in particular, we're focused on building infrastructure, electric infrastructure, to support large fleets of vehicles and highway fast charging, which we view as two huge problems for an electric utility. So the problem that I think we would like to see or jointly solve with the Port Authority and others, we've started working more proactively with them, is problem solving on a regional basis, because electricity is a regional problem. It's a regional commodity. It flows across the lines of service territories of the utilities in the state of New York and across country borders and state borders. It doesn't care, just like traffic and goods and services. And so particularly for the medium and heavy duty trucking sector, we would love to figure out a way that those that are consuming large amounts of power to move goods could work with their neighbors and finance interconnection the grid interconnection at that particular point of power delivery. Because it's today the way that most utilities service their customers is that any one of you come to us and say, we want to add 5 megawatts of service at this location, and we build a solution for you and you pay for it. And then you come back 5 years later and say, oh, we want to, let's say it's electric vehicle charging, we want to install 200 ports now. And we say, well, now you've exceeded the capabilities of our distribution system. We're going to put you on a 115 kV tap and build a new substation. It's going to cost you $50 million. And that investment you already made, that's a sunk cost for you. So that's a broken regulatory structure that doesn't provide the ability for customers that may have similar power needs that may be located right next to each other to work together and allow us to drive down the cost of interconnecting that electric demand. And it could be hydrogen creation and electric vehicle charging or charging electric planes. But today, the way our regulatory structure works in New York, at least for our service territory, it's this broken way. Doesn't allow us to forecast out to 2045 and say, let us build one time, touch the infrastructure one time, and let it last for 100 years.
So one last follow-up. and
Sorry,
you
long
answer it quick,
answer.
but this is, no, it was good, but particularly on the kind of regulatory issue. If you think about it in terms of, you know, the big customer, the port energy users, the big solution providers plug, the unregulated side of utilities in many states that are actually trying to develop solutions that go into the system, and the regulated utility that has to go get a rate case that says this is justified. Between that first three and the regulated utility, what would you prioritize as the most important problem to solve to get the level of cooperation across an entire system to accelerate? Because that you build an ecosystem pretty quick if you can identify it. I just wondering if you had a perspective or if anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear the thoughts of the folks on the panel. I think from my perspective, it's the ability to jointly forecast with industry and then have people like Plug Power come talk to our regulators about what does the next 45 years look like in Genesee County in New York at that particular site. Because today we don't forecast that far out. We're not allowed to build to accommodate the 2045
Yeah,
load.
I mean, it's really fascinating. And particularly, I think if you talk about transportation, electrification, and decarbonization generally, you've got wonderful projections that have no connection back to the utility, and it's kind of everybody's guessing. But anyway, great. Anybody have a comment on that? And then we'll go to another one. Yeah, we're going to go right there next. Anybody else? Or yeah, great. Thank you.
I just want to chime in on that. My name is Bobby Kriakos. I'm with the Port Authority. I'm the Chief Electrical. Yeah, we're facing the same thing. I think Derek mentioned that when he did the presentation on the new projects that we are undertaking. So we have substations. I'm on the electrical side, so we have substations that's supporting the current operations. And we also have, we're building new substations for future purposes, but once we started looking at the electrification, there's huge loads that's going to come to our substation. So right now we are engaging Con Edison on this side and also PSE&G on the other side. Like you said, in most cases the response is build a new substation, right? And like Newark Airport, we're looking at the consolidated rental car facility, accommodating the push for electrification for all the rental car companies. So we're looking at huge capacity needs, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that we need to invest on building substations to support this effort. So some kind of regulatory, changes would really help. And and also with the bus terminal, we're looking at electrification for the buses coming in. At the same time, we're looking at alternate energy sources to support, the utility power, or even for electrification of the vehicle. So some ideas will definitely help. Yeah, it's not like we're not talking to the utility companies, but the answer is that okay, build a new substation, invest in spend the money, invest in that. So I just wanted to chime in.
Quick question for clarification: when you look at that kind of magnitude of what you have to think about? What are the biggest risks or the areas of the kind of decision making that are just not your core business, right? You own substations now, you run them, but what about other things like renewables, or that you need help from National Grid, or you need help from these guys? Like, this doesn't make sense for me to do it, but who's going to do it, and how are they going to help me? Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's kind of limited. We have the JFK airport where we have some kind of renewable energy. It's the cogeneration facility where we could tap in some of the sources for some of the electrification. But the other facilities, it's kind of limited for us. Yeah, yeah.
Great. Any thoughts from the panel? How about in the audience? Yeah, come on in.
Yeah, I don't know if I need a mic. Steve Tapp with JetBlue. So, Aaron, I'm curious, when you were talking earlier about the project in Antwerp with the port, and I'm curious, what was the because I'm sure that they have looked at electrification versus hydrogen. Can you talk a little bit about the trade-offs there and kind of the pros and cons, and maybe, to the extent you can speak to it, why they decided to go with hydrogen instead of electrification?
Well, I'm sure there are folks in my company who would be able to talk more specifically about why that project, particularly, we chose them. But I think that there are a lot of benefits to hydrogen versus straight up electrification, where hydrogen is a constant source of power, for sure. Yeah, I'm not really. How about we talk about that a little bit offline?
Great. We got time for one more. There you go, right in the back.
Hello, I'm Patricia. I'm from Schenectady County Community College, and my question is really relating to the workforce. What are your thoughts on the readiness of the renewable energy workforce regarding training needs? Do you feel like they're there and they're ready for the future, for a year from now, 5 years from now? Do you see any things that need to happen?
Yeah,
This one is
that's
an
a great
easy one
question,
for me
yeah.
to answer. Especially, welcome, we should talk, especially where you guys are located. We spend a ton of time thinking about this, and in fact, we just brought on a new employee who's very focused on workforce training. We think that there are so many programs that we can be implementing, and we have implemented. One place that we found a lot of success is in the veterans community. There are a lot of men and women who are coming from the services who are ready to go and are able to provide engineering services. They can also be in our service centers, and they have the qualifications and the ideals in which we're looking for. Also, we're looking at creating programs at community colleges, as you said, and then also looking at programs like the BOCES and high schools and others. And so to answer your question is the workforce ready? Maybe not, but we're growing it and we're working on it, and we need everybody to get on board. And it's not just the well-educated chemical engineer, it's the folks that are coming out of high school and want to provide those service jobs. But I'm sure everyone on the panel is gonna have their own view on this. But come to us, we wanna talk, we're building programs now.
Yeah, well, for fuels and sustainable fuels, we're looking at 0.01% of supply currently, and we have to grow to 100% in the next 30 years. When you're looking at over 1,000 times growth, you can see that we're going to need jobs. Not all those jobs are going to come from the petroleum industry. There will be people who can repurpose and will plug into sustainable fuels, but we're going to need a whole lot of new people entering the workforce. And that's also on the construction side as well. I think we're going to be looking at a lot of infrastructure, smaller plants per se, but a lot of projects that will need to be delivered quickly. So those folks may not need specialized training to the same degree, but definitely within the production and operations, we will need new people in the workforce for that.
And I can just add one quick thing that we've seen in our company and with our clients as we look at what has to be built over the next 30 years. And there's a few realities. There is in places like utilities, a lot of architecture and engineering firms, there is a huge aging of the STEM workforce, right? That is leaving faster than we think. There is a demand for future resources that absolutely cannot be met with just replacing that workforce with the same people that did it. You can't do it without significantly expanding diversity and inclusion of the, building a complete workforce. There's no way you can get to that number without better STEM education, certainly in high school, and without a really robust community college network that can affordably deliver everybody the opportunity to get to where they need to go. And we see it time after time that community colleges at a state policy level, at a local policy level, have not been sufficiently invested in, their value hasn't been recognized, and that essential infrastructure hasn't built and the dots haven't been connected to four-year institutions and postgraduate. So I think it's actually one of the biggest challenges that we face, both in national, federal, and state, or your state and local policy. Like Aaron mentioned, a lot of people got their hands raised up, so it's certainly a partnership that makes a lot of sense. And I think with that, I think we're right at time, and I just want to thank the port. I want to thank the audience, the previous panel, and most of all for us, I want to thank our panelists for what I thought was a pretty fun discussion.